Dolan on the call for Arkansas, Texas on Touchdown Radio. Of course, he was on the call for LSU at Arkansas earlier this year. In the second week in a row, he gets to see the Longhorns. Brett, how you doing today?
Well, good. Hey, guys, I was listening earlier. I will say I'm green with envy with Bob Holt's audio lead-in to his segment, and I'm hoping you guys got to the bottom of the Bucky's business model that you were discussing yesterday on halftime, too. You know, I'm a listener as well as an occasional guest.
I'm just bummed out that there's not going to be Come and Go any longer. That's what the whole point of that was about. I'm just very upset about this, and
Great point.
I just think the Maverick people need to think a little bit differently about how they market things. But I'm glad to know you're listening, and I'll try to put a little open together for you. But you'll be on the call tonight too, right? You got basketball at Bud Walton Arena, Arkansas women's hoops against Texas Arlington. So it's a pretty busy weekend for you. It's a good thing you don't have to leave Fayetteville, but that means no airline points.
Yes, it does help. Last week was 5 games and 4 flights, and this week is only 4 games, but they're in 4 straight days. So we just finished up the UT Arlington coaches visit and a couple of soccer calls today for an NCAA soccer match tomorrow, and then football on Saturday. It doesn't stop.
Right, we got NCAA soccer tomorrow. All right, so you saw Texas last week. Things got out of hand pretty quickly. Florida just too banged up to really be able to compete in that ball game. Is Texas playing at their best right now, just like Ole Miss was when they came in?
Pretty close. They're interesting on offense. They don't run the football like some of the great teams do. They use their screen game and their swing passes like running plays. Really efficient, really fast. Sark, at times, I think, is dynamic play calling. And Arkansas is going to have their hands full considering how they were challenged defensively, against Ole Miss and LSU. Those teams picked them apart in 2 different manners. And they better be ready for the screen game, and they better be ready for a lot of misdirection.
Is this kind of a game where if Texas, if you're Arkansas, you're kind of hoping that maybe Texas isn't as focused? Maybe they're not really kind of coming here to. I don't know, because they're 20-year-old kids. To me, that's the only way Arkansas has a chance. Is Texas is going to have to play like a C- type of game, and the Hogs are going to have to play an A+ game.
I think it's a good point, Matt. I think it's something we've seen throughout this year, and I don't know if it's necessarily letdowns or it's more that it's difficult at times to play well every single week. The one thing Sark did last week coming off a bye is they're really the first team I've seen in the SEC that's played well for whatever reason coming off a bye, and he was very direct. He didn't want the bye week to bleed into game week from an intensity standpoint. Now, to your point, I think there's a lot of conversation in Texas about that game against the Aggies coming up the week of Thanksgiving. And will they start looking ahead because the schedule is somewhat soft until that point? Or will Sark be able to do what Sam has done and kind of educate his team on the rivalry, because it gets overlooked for these 18 to 22-year-old kids that this used to have a great meaning for a lot of people in both of these states. So that's the challenge, I think, for every team, just getting to the point in the SEC where you don't mail it in or don't put forth a bad performance when these games really count. Because quite honestly, it's weird for you and me and probably all of us to see 4 or 5 Big Ten teams right there at the top of the rankings with only Texas as the top SEC team right now.
Which one of these the Big Ten teams have you seen? I know you saw Penn State. You saw Ohio State too. Anyone else?
No, and I watched Indiana. I made a point to sit down, Phil, and watch your Hoosiers for the full game against Michigan. It was somewhat underwhelming. They didn't have the offensive game that they have had previous with their uniqueness and their high-scoring offense, but they got a win. So they're in a pretty good spot. And the fact that Penn State right now is in a position where they could be in the top 4, albeit not a conference champion, and they wouldn't be in the top 4 when the seedings came out if they ran the table, is a little bit odd, because I don't think they're worthy of that. But, the funny part was when they put this top 4 buys in, I wasn't a big fan of it. I didn't want to see a Big 12 team or an ACC team, if they weren't good, get a bye. But I think, in essence, by doing that, it keeps a Penn State from being able to be in the top 4 when they're not worthy of being in the top 4. So, there's still a lot of maneuverings to take place over these next few weeks to kind of see how this shakes out with the 12 teams. But my goodness, the SEC better not keep cannibalizing itself, or the Big Ten is going to have a lot better opportunities. And when you're seated higher, that means you host those games in December And I don't want to go play in Happy Valley on December 21st with it snowing and cold if I could help it, if I was Alabama or a Southern team.
Well, we had Tennessee. Arkansas was able to get by them at home, and then everybody kind of jumped off. They struggled, but Tennessee, all they've done since that loss is win. They're 8-1, headed into Athens 7-2. Feels like an elimination game. I mean, maybe Georgia could still get in with 3 losses. I don't know. How do you give Tennessee a chance going in between the hedges?
I do, and again, I think they've kind of figured out that they can win without clicking on all cylinders. They don't have to score 40 points to win with a pretty decent defense. It's obvious to me that Nico, while having a lot of talent, he will miss some shots. He'll miss some deep balls, and they do have a really good running game, though, with Sampson, which I think gives them a chance to win these 24-21 type games. I'm with you. I don't know what 3 losses does for some of these SEC teams, Georgia or whatnot. I think there'll be some 3-loss SEC teams, to me, that'll be better, talented teams than 1-loss Big 12 teams or maybe 2-loss Big 12 teams. But that's a tough call to make the committee choose you over a team that's only lost 1 or 2 games. So you're right about the intensity of some of these matchups in the SEC going forward, because whether they're true elimination games or whether they just put teams in spots where they're going to need so much help that they no longer control anything regarding their fate heading towards December.
Well, I mean, just look at where the Big Ten teams are ranked right here. Penn State and Indiana, they're not going to be conference champions in all likelihood, but they're going to get home games. They will get home games. Yep. Because of where they're ranked right now, unless either of those teams loses to Purdue, and they both play Purdue, and if they do lose to Purdue, they shouldn't be able to make the playoff. But they'll have home games in the situation where you're going to end up where, like, Ole Miss is probably going on the road. Alabama is probably going on the road. They may end up, those 2 teams, at Bloomington and State College, and it's like you got Penn State, their best win is Illinois. That's going to be their best win this year. Indiana's best win is Michigan. Probably going to be their best win of the year. Alabama's got 4 wins that are better than any of those, and two losses to teams that are in the top 25. And it's just like some of these, you got to weight the losses, and I don't know if they are.
1,000%. And I'm with you. I don't know how that's going to play out. I think you start looking at the quality of losses and the quality of wins. And when you look at Indiana and Penn State, it takes on an entirely different dimension. I would say when Indiana plays Ohio State, they'd be best served to play that game competitively and not lose by 21 or 28, because I think that gives the committee the recency bias. But I'm with you. Alabama's had some befuddling games, but their wins are as good as any team's wins, considering how hard it is to go on the road and not just win, but dominate some teams and take care of business. So it would be a shame for them not to have a good seed. But regardless, it does look like, Phil, and you're right, that there's going to be home games in Happy Valley and maybe Bloomington, Indiana, and then we're going to find out how guys that have grown up in the South enjoy playing when it's windy and it's cold, and you've got to be able to run the football, and games do not look like they do in September and October if the weather comes into play. I don't know if that'll make for great television and great theater, or whether it's going to muck it up, and teams like Penn State and Indiana will have a great shot of winning games that maybe they wouldn't were it in a dome or a neutral, warmer weather environment.
Brett, SMU, Boise State, which one of those teams, both of them maybe, which one of those do you think has the better chance to make this playoff 12?
Probably Boise. And I keep going back to a game earlier this year. They should have beaten Oregon, and maybe Oregon wasn't clicking on all cylinders. I think Oregon had a kick return for a touchdown. There was another impactful special teams play, and they still gave that a pretty good go as far as winning at Oregon. So I guess when you look at quality of losses, that's another case there. I think they've beaten UNLV already, and I don't know if they'd line up again with them for the conference championship game. I think they're in. Now, whether or not they're an 11 or 12 seed, that's probably going to be the situation. So I would probably lean towards them, but I do feel like there's a couple of wild cards that none of us are thinking about, and I can't tell you what that might look like. Whether an Army could get in into the group of
Colorado
5.
Runs the table, yeah.
Colorado, absolutely. There was a team that I kind of gave up on in the first month, and and a Hail Mary turned their season around. They were heading in a bad direction before they got a Hail Mary to beat Baylor, and it's given them a chance now where they do control their fate in the Big 12 that I'm convinced is not as good. BYU has had some terrible finishes that they've won games that they probably shouldn't have won, but credit to them, they've continued to do so.
Right now with college football, the way that it is, even with a playoff 12, it makes less sense to me than it did with 4. The sport makes no sense to me at the moment, Brett, and I'm perfectly okay with that.
But it doesn't make sense. And you know, I've said time and time again, I was not a big fan of the 12-team playoff. It's kind of warming on me because, and I don't think the NCAA did this by design unless maybe Greg Sankey was the one guy who knew it, that we're truly in this portal era now where it's hard to maintain culture and chemistry, and teams no longer have the same ability to play well for 11 or 12 weeks. There's more of an NFL scheduling where you're going to have a couple of weeks where you don't play well because you don't have the continuity and the culture, and it means the SEC is no longer going to have 12-0 or 11-1 teams where they can get more teams in the 12-team playoff because they no longer have to be in the top 4. I don't know if that was done by design at all. I think it just happened into luck. It's made for pretty good theater for us because all of a sudden now we're talking about more teams. I think there's fewer good teams, but you're right, there's an unpredictability around this sport that, quite honestly, we just haven't had for maybe decades.
All right, soccer tomorrow. It's the first round of the NCAA tournament for Arkansas. They'll play Oklahoma State. I mean, it's another year with a really good regular season, maybe a little earlier out in the conference tournament than we're used to. Hoping to get to that College Cup for the first time. Tell me what you think of tomorrow's matchup.
Well, it's a really unfortunate matchup. I think both coaches have indicated this is really not fair. I mean, Oklahoma State was on the verge of hosting. Arkansas, with maybe another win or two in the conference tournament, would have been a 1 seed instead of a 2. This basically feels like two teams that should be meeting in a Sweet 16, meeting in the first round. So, if Arkansas gets by this team who's had 12 shutouts this year, well, Arkansas is by far the highest scoring soccer team in the country. The Hogs could roll for a while, and they could be back in a position in the Elite Eight again, going on the road, trying to finally get to a College Cup. But the fact that these two teams are meeting, it wouldn't happen in very many sports. It wouldn't happen in basketball, it wouldn't happen in baseball, and it probably wouldn't happen in softball. But whether it's saving some money on regional rivalries, it's a little bit unfair. But it should make for maybe the best first-round matchup in college soccer tomorrow night.
So you got basketball tonight, soccer tomorrow, football Saturday. Man, Brett, you're pulling a nice little trifecta in 3 days.
Yeah, then we got a basketball game on Monday, and then I can rest for a little bit before my L.A. to Cancun to Oregon road trip over Thanksgiving. But it's been a little crazy, I will admit. We both you and I love to be busy and have a lot of games, but it might be too much this week.
Might have to have a special day just for play-by-play guys. I heard you give the sports information directors their shout-outs yesterday, and everybody else across the country did. It was SID Day across the country, but they never do that for the play-by-play guy.
We need a day. We need a week for that matter.
I think we get 365 days if you just ask me.
BetOnline is the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, NBA, and college basketball, NHL to UFC and MMA. Head to BetOnline today to get in on the action with America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here.